Thanks for having me. It's always fun for me to speak to different audiences, and this is an audience I've been excited to speak to for a while. So I love the diversity of the background you have, and that there aren't a lot of architects in the room, which means the conversation's a bit different. I'm going to start actually with this quote that I love and I've been using a lot. We're designing the new forestry school at Oregon State University, and I used it last week with them. It's this incredibly powerful idea that everything begins with an idea, begins with the motivation of individuals and organizations. And I think this organization is a great example of this, that through propagating the mission and values, we can make enormous difference around the world. And that's been sort of an ambition of our firm as well, and the work we've been doing, so I thought I'd show you a little bit about it. And I thought I'd show you a little video we made of a building we designed recently that in a moment you're going to probably recognize. Entirely made in wood. We wanted to understand what really the potential of this amazing product would be and the future of it from an engineering point of view. So we were actually asked by a Finnish company, Metsä, to put together a little engineering package and design package to show how, if we wanted to, we could build the Empire State Building. And what we found is that you can, and it's kind of an amazing thing to think about. The Empire State Building is, it's stood since 1930, and it's stood to 102 stories tall. And, for a long time now, I've been talking, if you've seen my TED Talk, about 30 stories tall of wood buildings. And this was the first time we really sort of pursued this idea of going to incredible heights, and why not? Why wouldn't we look at whether that was possible? And so when you think about the idea of the Empire State Building in wood, it sort of reminds you that the technology to do so already exists. It's actually not going to require enormous innovation. So we studied how we will do what's called post-tensioning wood. I won't go into the details, but we can do it with the products that are actually made today. We don't need to even innovate beyond this. But innovation is going to take us to a new world. And if you think about the Empire State, built in 1930, steel was kind of at its heyday. And it's actually a remarkable piece of engineering in steel, and therefore even more remarkable in wood. But for me, it actually sort of reminds me just how incredibly powerful the tree itself is and the engineering that's packed in the nature of a tree. And I often think about, a tree standing through a hurricane and how the very shallow root structure manages to keep that huge tree erect through that storm. Or how that very thin limb that's carrying leaves in fall, and there's an early snowfall, and it weights up with snow. And that very thin and delicate limb still has the incredible strength to be able to hold up that weight. And then I think back to my job as an architect and my friends that are engineers, and I think, boy, we understand very little about what we're doing, and that tree is more sophisticated engineering in it than we'll probably ever get to, but certainly something that we should look to. And so I think a lot about this issue of nature as an educator, and recently I've been thinking a lot more about this term Trophic Cascade, and many of you who are biologists would remember from school would probably know this concept, but it's really when a top predator changes in some way its pattern, and therefore it influences the entire food chain beneath it. And the example that recently I was thinking about was the story of the wolves in Yellowstone, how we removed the wolves and then we've reintroduced the wolves, and how when we did that, some obvious things happened, right? The wolves eat the deer and the elk, and then there's less deer and elk, and then there's more berries, and of course that means more small wildlife lives, and that creates this cascading change when we reintroduce the wolf. But that change, to me, is more interesting because the wolf, when we introduced it, does even more than change the wildlife. And many of you know this, but for me this was an important revelation, is that as the elk move to safer locations and away from open areas where they might be eaten along stream beds and so forth, it means those plants along the stream edge are sustained and there's less erosion, and ultimately it means that because we've reintroduced wolves, rivers and streams are not changing the same way. So the wolf has this profound effect, not just on the animals and the plants, but actually the physical environment. So we know this. This is an amazing reality in nature. And of course, when we think of trophic change, we are the top predator, right? We are supposed to be the most sophisticated species on Earth. And yet, as humans, we seem to have kind of really dropped the ball on this, our intellectual capacity to actually address some of this sort of rippling effect that we have. And so I think about it in the terms of what I do, of wood buildings. And so if we were to build more buildings in wood, and we were to do it in kind of an unstructured way, we would do this. We'd harvest more timber, and there'd be less wildlife habit and more erosion, and we'd change river paths just like the wolves through erosion, and then eventually damage our ecosystem, and we'd lose global forests, which is exactly what none of us in the room are interested in doing. And so option 2 is what we are doing, and that's through this program and other programs like it. We are starting to build the structures necessary to further the research, further the innovation at the forestry level and all the way through to the building level, to make sure that if I choose to use more wood, we'll harvest more trees, we'll plant more forests, we'll manage the habitat better, and we'll ultimately increase the forest carbon, and then in turn I can harvest and use that wood in my buildings to increase the carbon footprint of the carbon benefit of my building. So that's all. I think we all in the room understand it, and yet we have to step back and realize that that is why certification is the acorn. Without it, we don't actually propagate the benefit of the idea. And if you're a business person standing in the room, the success of your business doesn't propagate unless we actually excel and improve the way we certify and the environmental impact of forests. So what can we do? Well, the first thing is on your end, many of you, it's cut down our trees more responsibly, increase our innovation and our research, and certify. So we know that. But we need to spread that message, which is why I'm so grateful to be here, talking to you who already know the message, the beginning of the acorn. And then for me, I need to build buildings a lot more responsibly. And so if you in the room know the word LEED, and we hear it all the time, and it's got controversy with certification and so forth, LEED is a really good middle ground for sustainable building. It's talked about by a lot of people as though it's an aspiration of a high ground of where we need to build, but it's not. It's the middle ground. It brings kind of mediocre architects not really focused on sustainability up to the middle. It by no means gets us to where we need to be as a society if we're going to deal with the future that we're facing, with the scale of building and so forth that we're facing. So for us in the room, from architect to engineer to all of you in the forestry sector and forest researchers and forest scientists, we are all interconnected, and that's the real change that I'm seeing in our industry. So from the very basics of how the forest is managed, it connects all the way back to the sourcing of the products and the way I build my building. And the more and closer that we are together, which I think is happening, the better and stronger the wood side of the industry, the renewable side of what I can build with, is going to be. And that's exciting. It's really exciting. And it's a change that means that we're sharing and supporting each other's innovations and research in each of our sub-industries within this loop. And we need to continue. And we need to continue it not just for the health of the forest, but because if we all think about the process of going from forest to wood in buildings, it influences a huge stratosphere of jobs, and really important jobs, and especially in rural communities that we all care about. But more so, it's not just the direct jobs, it's the amazing array of indirect jobs that are ultimately sort of filtering up and influenced. So more and more and more, we feel in the work we're doing, a direct connection, not just to building a tall building, and I'm going to show you more about that, but actually how that tall building goes all the way back to the logger that's cutting down the tree, and how that chain of custody is a chain of responsibility to individuals, to communities, to jobs, and to the environment altogether. And how we do that, well, it's really about innovation. And when we talk about innovation in my side, in the built environment side, it's interesting to look at history. We started with wood buildings and many, many traditional ways of buildings. We went to early light wood frame buildings that we saw sort of when early settlers came to North America. We started developing more and more heavy timber buildings. For many centuries now, we've been doing these heavy timber buildings and learning about how they work. My office in Vancouver is a 6-story tall, almost, 7-story tall, heavy timber building that's 105 years old. We've known how to do pretty incredible things with wood, and then we stopped. And steel and concrete took over for a century. And now wood's back. And wood's back and has not disappeared at the suburban scale in lightweight wood housing, which is good. But where it hasn't been is in the mid-rise and high and institutional kind of range, and especially in urban environments. But urban is where we're moving, and so we're moving to what we call mass timber. which is heavy panels of wood that allow us to build much bigger buildings, and I'm going to get into it. But where we're going next is as important as where we are today. And where we are today is the beginning of a movement to mass timber and the building of larger buildings in our cities, which is very exciting, and it will transform all of our jobs in the room. But where we're going ultimately is towards really advanced technologies where we're already researching wood fiber 3D printing, 3D printed beams, structures that are not made from cutting logs in the ways we're used to cutting logs. And this industry has to keep progressing along to ultimately be successful, which means this continued need to innovate. And we're doing that work right now through a not-for-profit school I run. So the story for me is urban. It's not about suburban housing. We see that being built in wood. We're moving to these urban environments, which means all new technologies. And tall is important, but tall's important to me not at these ridiculous heights of the Empire State Building, because truthfully, we're not going to be building the Empire State Building in wood anytime soon. Just because we can, maybe we shouldn't. But tall's important because when people adjust to the idea of possibility, that you can build a tall building, all of a sudden, the idea of a mid-rise, where most people will live and work, seems very safe and reasonable. So we stretch imagination here in order to meet the middle of where everybody ultimately will be. And that's been true of every industry, and that's where this industry is going right now. So the menu of city building has been steel and concrete for some time. We're moving to these new products made of wood, gluing together these mass timber panels. We have this entire new menu. Laminated strand, laminated veneer, CLT, they're all, for me, the family of mass timber products. These are products that give us strength in scale and strength in using smaller trees, lesser grades of trees, rather than old growth and large scale timbers. We're able to use a new product to make something so much stronger. So it's not just tall, it's more, and I'm just going to show you some examples. So at 8 stories, this building is the tallest in North America, and it's a building we designed and opened a year ago called the Wood Innovation Design Center. It's getting a fair amount of airplay, so many of you may have seen it, but it's entirely made of wood after you leave the ground. So there's no steel, there's tiny steel connectors in it, but there's no concrete whatsoever. The concrete's in the ground, everything else is wood. It's a CLT building made with some really fun technologies that I won't go into in detail. But it's beautiful. It's beautiful to be in a building like this. It's as sound as any strong concrete building you've ever stood in, and it's safe, really safe. The elevator cores are made of timber. Even the fire stairs are entirely solid wood with no drywall. Things that we've never imagined are now happening, and they're changing the building codes. They're changing the evolution of where architects are thinking about the future, and it's a really exciting time. But it's still the beginning, especially in America. It's still very much the beginning. And so schools, our universities, I know Clemson's interested in it, and we were just talking about it. I know OSU is interested in it. I know the University of Washington. There's universities across the United States focusing on this technology and how it's going to meet the market, and they need our support, our continued support, and I'm really excited about the energy our institutions are putting into these ideas, because it's got to filter down eventually to reach the architects, and that takes a little while. So this building, for us, is a milestone, but to be honest, we weren't even breaking a sweat to build an 8-story tall wood building. People thought it was outrageous, and it wasn't even hard at all. We should be building twice this height tomorrow. It's so easy. But it's a matter of changing people's perception of what's possible. They're not ready to invest in these ideas because they feel like they're too new and fresh. It's not always about what's engineering and what science says is possible. We have to capture the hearts and minds and emotions of the community that want these buildings. And that's a different kind of exercise. So that exercise means changing the way we talk about the forest. If you remember earlier, I talked about what happens when we cut down trees from unregulated, uncertified land. Well, that's the perception that many still hold in the public about forestry. We know that. We need to flip that conversation and explain why it actually has these huge benefits. Much as people thought in the beginning, the introduction of the wolf was something that was a bad idea and didn't understand it and were afraid of it. But it turned out to be such a positive change for Yellowstone and bringing back so much of the natural systems that previously existed. So we're doing more and more of this, and it's exciting. A few people here I know from Minnesota. This building's under construction already. It's the largest, I think the largest wood building in the United States, but we're excited about it. It's actually not very tall, it's 7 stories, but it's nice technology, and it's not even super sophisticated technology. It's nail laminated wood, which means just nailing together boards to make big solid walls and floors. And tall buildings are happening everywhere right now. So we're actually writing a book with a Swiss publisher, and we have about 20 different projects in the book from around the world that some are really beautiful, some are really technically cool, and not so beautiful, unfortunately, but they're all wood, and they're all tall, and they're popping up at different heights. Many of these are already built, 10, 12 stories tall are starting to become numbers we're seeing built. And more importantly, we're seeing these numbers of people trying to reach further and further for the moon. So last week, the University of British Columbia announced an 18-story tall wood student housing building that's going to be built. And that's next. And there are 14 and 20 and all these different heights being announced almost daily, it seems like, because people are ready for a change. People are ready for a new way to build. Architects are excited about it, but most importantly, we all understand that if we do it right with certified products, we actually have the capacity to make a real difference. So for Trophic Cascade, we actually are doing the things that we know we should responsibly do for a change instead of just building recklessly out of materials that have these huge environmental footprints. So a long time ago, I was introducing the ideas, and people did think we were crazy, and we drew this building, these series of buildings for Cornell that would be 30 stories tall. And it's, as I said, when we have been doing this engineering, and after we got all the way to 102, we know that they're possible, and we know this is coming, but it's going to take some time. It's going to take a kind of collective, that circle I showed of all of us working together as an industry, from forest to frame, that we're all going to ultimately have to, change the public's perception of what is possible. These buildings are incredibly beautiful to be in. They're incredibly safe because of the new methods we're working with. By the way, if you're wondering, the wood is not exposed to the weather. It's actually covered entirely with a thin layer of glass that creates what we call a double-skin wall that protects it. So it's protected wood. And that momentum, as I come close to the end here, that momentum of buildings being proposed around the world and buildings actually being realized around the world is kind of, I think, an irreversible trend. And it means we'll be sourcing more wood, and we're going to need it to be. We're going to need to feel as designers and as clients, we're going to need to feel secure that it's been sourced through a proper chain of custody, and that we really trust the certification process, and that process is continuing to get better. That's the way it grows. That's the way the opportunity grows for business, and again, for us to feel confident. So as part of that exercise, about a month ago, I was in South Africa. And we, through my school, which is called DBR down at the bottom there, we teamed with UNFAO, and we made a global competition. And part of it was for affordable wood housing, and part of it was for a tall wood building in Africa, in Durban, South Africa, where the World Forest Congress was. And what was incredible about this is that we got 240 submissions by architectural teams around the world to design a tall wood building from 60 different countries. A huge number from Iran, don't ask me why. A lot also from America, a lot from Britain, a lot from Australia, but a lot from unique corners of the world that we don't hear from very often. And the message to me that I really felt was that the interest in this is huge. The passion that young people are bringing to designing in this new way is huge. The fascination with we finally have a new way to build a tower, the first new way to build a tower in 100 years. It's an exciting time. And at the end of the day, it just always comes back to this for me, is that it begins with that initial seed, the initial beginning decision to invest in innovation, something that I don't think in the building sciences North America has been good at all. The United States, of its entire innovation investment each year, invests 0.0001% of innovation investment on building sciences. Buildings represent, if you've seen my TED Talk, you know this, 47% of climate impact and about the same amount of energy impact. And innovation investment is 0.0001. So there's a lot of influential people in the room. That is a message I want to get out there. It's time for us to change that and increase investment in innovation. Because when we do so, the Trophic Cascade changes. and we make a huge difference. So tall is amazing. The Empire State Building, it's an inspiring thing to be part of. We were so lucky. And this is why someday we dream that when you look up, and these are classic photos from the building of that building, you will see this. And you'll see this. And it's not that far away. So I'm going to close with this wonderful statement because, you know, we are all just making our tiny differences. We're all those tiny acorns in the process. But a society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they will never sit in. And there's some pretty amazing people here that are going to make that big difference. So I thank you for this opportunity to speak to you.